All right, hello everyone. I'm Daniel, back for more scenario reviewing time with SuperFang99. How you doing?
Great.
All right, ready for a thrilling car chase?
I am. I just recently watched your playthrough, true solo of your Stella playthrough. No spoilers, but pretty ready to talk about the scenario. Very fast paced, so hopefully this is a fast paced review.
Absolutely. Well, here we go. So, intro.
Yeah. So we are heading towards the lighthouse after leaving Innsmouth, or I should say, we're still in Innsmouth, but we've left the main city, and we are in a car chase. Some people are following us, and we need to get to where are we going? Falcon Point
Falcon
Lighthouse, I think
Point,
that's what it's
yeah.
called. Yeah. So we got to get there before they destroy us slash kill us. Yeah. So I was akin this scenario. It feels, at least in my mind, very similar to the Essex County Express.
hmm
It is very linear, I should say, and you're always it feels against the clock. So to represent this sort of car chase, we can go to setup, and we can see that our locations are going to be set up in a particular way. I'm just going to click this button. Well, there's some error there, but I think it should be maybe okay. I think these three might be the bottom three, so I think we just put these on top.
Yeah, I think that's what it is.
Yeah, so essentially we're going to construct a road. Two of these old Innsmouth road cars, or I should say three, are going to be starting in play. We're going to start at this rightmost one, and we're going to build our road as we go. The first thing we should also look at is that we are going to start in a car. So there are two cars available to us. Essentially, if you're only playing solo, obviously you're only going to be in one car. But if you have, I think it's three or more people, is that
hmm
right? Or
Yeah, three or four.
yeah, three or actually, yeah, that's right. If there, yeah, right, yeah. Where actually is that? It's in here somewhere. Uh, each investigator must choose a vehicle to board. So
Mhm.
actually, I think technically, if you have a two-player, you can both be in a different vehicle. Is that correct?
Maybe you're right. That seems like a bad idea.
I've never done that, but you can do it. Anyway, so basically you can choose one of these, and they both have the same text, so we'll just read them as the same. So here's the car. It's a vehicle, as we've discussed in Devil Reef, and you can only have two investigators in a vehicle at a time. Uh, the front side is that the car is running. Investigators cannot enter or leave it. Keep both your hands and feet within the vehicle at all times. There is also an action if you are the vehicle's driver. So when you enter the vehicle slash are in the vehicle, you have to decide who is the driver. And I believe you can't change who the driver is unless the driver leaves, if I understand correctly.
That's right. If you
Um,
stop the car and then get out, and then you are now the vehicle's driver, I believe.
correct.
If the whoever's
Um,
left in the car, yeah.
exactly. So if you are the vehicle's driver, you can take the action to draw the top card of the encounter deck, then move this vehicle to a connecting road location. We'll get to what that means. Essentially, you're pressing the gas a little bit. And also, of course, if you are the driver, you can stop the car. On the backside, it's just saying that it's stopped, and if you're the vehicle driver, you can start it again. So, what does it mean for it to be stopped or started, or running, I should say? Well, that is the main mechanic of the scenario. The cars are going to be going forward, regardless of what we're doing. Okay, so let's talk about our act. Our act is pedal to the metal. Each enemy gains hunter. They are indeed chasing us. And the forced effect here is at the end of each investigation phase, each vehicle that is running must move to a connecting road location of the driver's choice. Generally, that's going to be to the right. I think you could technically go to the left. Am I crazy?
You could.
Yeah, you could go backwards if you really wanted to. I would suggest not to do that, but maybe you left someone behind somehow. Anyway, and that is our act. We also have a different agenda based on whether or not the terror of Devil Reef is alive or dead. So if you recall in Devil Reef, the previous scenario, if you had the flashback for the fight against the monstrous creature or whatever it's called, you can defeat the terror of Devil Reef. And if you do, you get a specific agenda. So let's assume that he's dead for now. And we'll get to what happens if he's alive when the agenda flips. But this front one is the same for either one. And essentially, it will tell us how the road is continuing to be kind of constructed. So, as an additional cost for you to move while not in a vehicle, you must spend two actions, kind of similar to Devil Reef. And then here's the other very important forced effect: is at the end of the round, Starting with the rearmost location, set each location with no vehicles, enemies, or investigators aside out of play, or added to the victory display if it had Victory X and no clues on it. Stop when you reach a location with at least one vehicle, enemy, or investigator, or the location behind the rearmost investigator. So a lot of people who play this scenario for the first time, I think understandably, might be a little confused on what this is saying. So I think an example might be useful.
Yeah.
So let's say that we are in Eleanor Harper's car, and let's say that this is the state of the map at the end of the round. There would technically be one more location here, but let's not worry about that for now. If there were no other enemies as well, the way that this would work is that this location would get removed. Mm-hmm. Then we would check this location, but since it's one location behind the rearmost investigator, we would stop. Therefore, we'd only remove this one. If, for example, there was actually also someone here, then we would not even remove this one, since this is one location behind the rearmost investigator. Additionally, let's say that there was an enemy here. This would be very, very unlikely and probably impossible. But if this was the case, we would not remove any locations because this rearmost location has an enemy and therefore we should stop. Of course, if it was here, then of course we would still remove this since it only checks the rearmost investigator to check the location behind rearmost investigator.
And part of the reason why this happens is if you look at this particular enemy, I believe almost all of them do something like spawn at the rearmost location. So
correct.
They don't spawn with you with the exception of, I think, just one of the enemies.
Yeah.
So,
and if you didn't remove the locations, they would spawn like 5 locations behind you.
Exactly. So
yeah.
Okay.
Alrighty. So that is the roads. We should talk about as well the road keyword on the locations.
Mm-hmm.
So let's flip this one over. See what it is. Oh my god, it's this one. Anyway, it's Cliffside Road. So every location in this scenario has a Road X keyword, and they actually show you the definition of what this is in the campaign guide. Essentially, Road X is that the next road in the sequence, that's how many choices that you're going to have for which way to go. So Road 1 is pretty straightforward. You just take the next old Innsmouth Road location on the top of this something. I think it's the road deck. That's what it's called. And you put it into play to the right of your current location. However, if you had a road that had road like 2 or 3, for example, this one is actually a good example. Let's say this was over here. This one has road 2. You would take one location from the top and then one additional from the old these locations, which are all labeled long way around. And you would put them together, shuffle them together, and then put them in a kind of column-esque thing in front of the next road. And when you're moving from this road, you can either go there or there. You don't really know which way to go, except, of course, there might be something on the location that could help you with that choice.
Mm-hmm. In fact, maximum, there always is, I believe.
Yes, and there should be. Maximum, I believe, is road 3. Like, there shouldn't be anything more than that. And road 3, obviously, you take one card and then 2 more long ways around in order to produce your next segment.
That's right.
Okay.
So you're always able to move to any location in this column, but these two are not connected to each other.
Correct. Yeah.
So let's say, for the sake of, example here, if we went to the wrong location, because one of these is the long way around, what would happen?
Yeah. So when it gets flipped over, it says a force effect after a vehicle enters here. You would put a doom on the current agenda. It could cause it to advance. That's a bad thing. Also, that vehicle can't leave this location until the end of the next round. So importantly, the car moving usually happens at the end of the investigation phase. So that means that next round, this car cannot leave this location also. So it's kind of like you are stuck for 2 rounds kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, how do you get out of here? It does say road 1 on here, though.
It does. So there would be 1 to the right of this. And now this one is connected to that way.
Mm-hmm. If you were to then have in the other car, let's say, go to this one.
Yeah.
This also says road 1.
Yes. So does this actually address this? It's a good question. I've never actually thought about
it. I believe it does.
I think so.
If there are no locations ahead of the revealed location. So you don't put another one in.
Yes. So since this this location is connected to both of the ones in the previous column, it is considered to be ahead of it, and therefore it's connected that way now.
That's right.
As well as this.
Okay.
All right.
That's the main movement mechanic, but then there's lots of other text on these locations that say something about how easy it is to leave, or what happens if you leave. So let's take a look at the text, going back to the first one again.
Okay, so let's look at Cliffside Road. 2 shroud, 2 per clues. It has victory 1. Forced. When a vehicle leaves this location, investigators at this location as a group must spend 2 clues for each investigator in that vehicle. If they cannot, the vehicle's driver tests willpower X or agility X, where X is the number of clues they could not spend. If the driver fails, their vehicle is removed from the game, and each investigator in that vehicle takes 10 damage. They fell off the cliff.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. So important kind of rules thing about this is, and correct me if I'm wrong, the investigators at this location must spend as many clues as they can in order to fulfill this. They cannot choose to not spend clues, correct?
That's right. You must spend. So you can't save clues basically for these sorts of effects either. There's a few other, this is going to happen over and over again, something like this. Very often it'll ask you, how many clues don't you have? It's just after spending all the ones that you could.
Correct. That being said, if there are 2 vehicles here and they're both leaving at the same time, the investigators can kind of shimmy around clues as they see fit, if I recall.
Yeah, so like
that is technically true.
I think the vehicles leave like one after another, so you decide who moves first, I think.
Effectively, yeah. It's a forced effect on the act that both of them move, so because they're both forced effect, you could order them as you wish.
Mm-hmm.
I think. Well, yeah, maybe. All right,
so anyway. Like if the people who have all the clues, right, go first, you probably don't want that to happen. You want them to go last.
You could have the other one go first. They spend their other person's clues, they leave, and then you spend your own clues, and then you go. And it should be fine.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's a Cliffside Road. This one is definitely one of the tougher ones.
Now,
but
if you failed this and you remove your vehicle, let's say you do survive the 10 damage, you've got a deny existence or something in your hand, or who knows what happens to the rest of the game? You have no vehicle, you gotta walk.
You gotta walk, and it takes 2 additional actions to walk, so you're walking.
We'll see you later.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. One other thing we should say is that these 2 locations behind the starting location are unrevealed and probably will never be revealed unless you decide to go backwards.
Correct.
So if these were the 2, they're just here as placeholders, essentially.
Yeah, like spacers in case an enemy spawns / gives you time for an enemy to spawn, etc.
Right. Which is fine. Sometimes these are victory point locations, and it's very sad, but
yeah, I think that's honestly kind of unfortunate. I could see a scenario where they just put one of these long ways around behind you just to avoid that scenario, but it is a little sad.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I guess we'll look at all these locations for their effects. There's basically 2 or 3 of like the same type.
Correct.
So what do we have behind us just to round out the locations here?
Oh, yeah. So this is the intersection. It has road 3. So reminder, it takes 1 at the top and 2 long ways around for the next column. 3 shroud, 2 per clues, victory 1, and you can spend 1 per clues as a group, or I should say investigators can, at this location can, to look at the revealed side of any location ahead of this one. Hopefully to be able to see which ways are the long way around to avoid them.
Mm-hmm. So there's enough clues to look at the 2 wrong ones, basically. You don't need to look at all 3.
Correct. That being said, of course, if you get lucky and you look at the right one first, you might have some extra clues that might help you with further roads.
That's
down
right.
The line.
Yeah. So those you can save clues for. Of course, you might want to clear this off anyway because of the victory.
Indeed.
It's funny to compare this one to this one.
Yeah. So this one is road 2. It has the same exact free triggered ability, if I recall. Yes. Mm-hmm. 4 shroud victory 1, only 1 per clues, but because it's road 2, of course, that's still enough.
That's right. But you're likely to clear this one off because those are all the clues that are on the location.
Yeah.
Whereas this one, you don't really need to clear them all off. And remember, the main mechanic here of the scenario is that if you don't clear off the location by the end of the investigator phase, you're leaving the location. So,
and of course, at the end of the round, they might go away if they're further back than any enemies / one location behind the rearmost investigator.
exactly. So yeah, I think this is like kind of cool. Like most of what we're seeing here is get all the clues in one round, or else remember you can stop the car if you feel like you don't have enough ways to get all the clues and you don't want to take that test, or maybe you want the victory. You can flip over your car instead and work on the clues for an extra round. Now, there's good reasons not to do that. We didn't do in the setup that depending on the number of players in the game, there may be an enemy already behind you.
Correct. Additionally, the way that the road deck is set up, it's that you take 2 Old Innsmouth Road and the objective location, Falcon Point approach. You shuffle them together to form the bottom 3. And then I believe the rest of the deck is what, like 10, 12 long, something like that?
12, yeah.
Yeah, 12 total. So you're gonna need to work through at minimum like 9 different locations. And because of the way that the scenario works, you can essentially only count on having 1 location per round to do it. Obviously, you can floor it and get through more if you're really desperate. But you're basically on a race against the clock the whole time. So there are reasons, as you said, to not want to stop the car. So there it is.
Yeah, and I think the victory points are hard. Like imagine you're here, right? And you say, I've got enough clues already. You hit pedal to the metal, you move here, which means that suddenly you're moving again from the forced effect.
Correct.
And that's not good because you don't know where to go.
No.
But if you stop the car, you can stop and get the clues and figure out where to go. Unfortunately, you spent an action to draw an encounter card when you would have just moved anyway, right?
Correct.
So that pedal to the metal ability is sometimes risky.
Yes. Usually, and this is personal preference, the only reason I do pedal to the metal is if obviously we feel like we're like have enough actions that we could react to the next one, or we know exactly which one we're going to because we peeked at its revealed side. And therefore we know like, oh, it's not a victory point location, or it's like, oh, someone has some actions left that they can just get it off easy.
And it's also worth saying that not all of them are this rough if you don't have enough clues. So this one is victory point. You want the clues anyway. But let's look at some other locations and you'll see kind of what we mean.
Yes. All right. So we got tight turn, which is also one of these. I think there's like 3 tight turns. I'm not actually sure. This one, or like, let's look at this one actually. This one is 4 shroud 1 per clues with road 1. And when a vehicle leaves its location, investigators here must spend 1 clue per investigator. For each clue they could not spend, they take 2 damage. This one, they spend 2 clues per investigator. For each clue they could not spend, they take 2 damage. So this one has a lower shroud because it's shroud 2. But you have to spend more clues, and you effectively can take more damage because you could take 4 damage instead of just 2, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and this still means you can go on through if you are able to tank the damage. Okay.
Yep. And technically, this is always fun. Let's say you spend 0 clues, and there's 2 people in the vehicle. Technically, 1 person could take all of the damage, if I recall.
Yes, but I think it's twice, right? So if you want to deny existence, it's just like 2 of it.
Correct. Yeah. You would have to. It would be for each clue. Investigate. Yeah. So in this case, if there's 2 people in the thing, they could not spend 4 clues. 1 person could take 8 damage in 4 instances, if I recall, something like that.
Right. For each clue that you couldn't spend, it's 1 clue for 2 damage, right? So if you had no clues, 1 person could take 4 chunks of 2 damage. Yeah.
Yeah. If they really wanted to.
If they really wanted to, Calvin Wright gets powered up real quick.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I think this is totally doable. So you mentioned that I played this solo. You can imagine it's a little bit easier to do this scenario solo because the consequences and the number of actions that you need for getting the clues is much lower. Like you can just kind of race through. You don't have to stop and say, well, how do I spend 1 action to get 3 clues in my 3-player game? You don't have to do that so much in solo.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think especially in two players with two people in the same vehicle, um, these can be a little tough because usually the way that like teams like that are set up is that one person is like dedicated clover, one person dedicated fighter, for example. And if the dedicated clover can't do enough, then the fighter is basically like, I'm here in the vehicle doing nothing, and I just being forced to take damage.
Exactly. As we'll see with the enemies, it's kind of weird for this
Yeah,
scenario. So you need
yeah,
to be able to do some amount of clue getting. Yeah.
correct.
Okay. What else we have?
Yeah, so let's just keep it going. So we've got a desolate road. So this one is road one, 4 shroud, one per clues, victory one. When a vehicle leaves location, spend a clue for each investigator in the vehicle. If they can't, discard cards from the top of the encounter deck until a vehicle enemy is discarded and spawn that enemy here. So that actually, this one doesn't care about how many clues they couldn't spend, but you still must spend as much as you can, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And this one's interesting because it, if this is at the end of the investigation phase, if this occurs, then the vehicle enemy will spawn here, and we will go straight to the enemy phase, and it could just hit you. It's an ambush.
That's true.
Right.
Right, because they have Hunter, right? They'll come after you during the enemy phase. Yep, yep.
Right, but also like this, the vehicle enemy that got spawned here spawns here instead of at the rearmost. Right.
Yes, and it engages you, so yeah, it moves along with you. Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Got it. Okay. Next one.
Okay, we got the dimly lit road, 3 shroud, 2 per clues. This is the same thing, but for horror. So this one is 2 clues per investigator, but for each clue you kind of spend, you only take 1 horror, which is slightly different. I think there's a damage one that's equivalent to that as well, if I recall.
Yeah. There should be one more of these that's like the tight turn. Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
Here's the second cliffside road. Is this? Oh, this one is just 1 shroud, 3 per clues.
Yeah.
And they need to spend 2 per clues. It's the same. So it's the
same
same
number of clues, just different number of clues on the location.
Correct. So in theory, other people could help with this to be like, oh, we need to get a lot.
Mm-hmm.
All right. We got a second fork in the road. This is very similar, except it has 5 shroud instead of 4, and that's it.
Pretty tough to investigate and get your victory point with 5 shroud. Indeed.
All right, we got our second intersection. This one just has 4 shroud instead of 3. It's just a harder version of the other one, like this one.
Yep.
Continuing on, this is dimly lit road. 4 shroud, 1 per, 1 clue to 2 horror. So this one is equivalent of that one for horror.
Mm-hmm.
Next, we should get this tight turn. Yeah, this one is 3 shroud and then 2 clues. Every 1 clue is 1 damage.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Here's our desolate road. So this one is 3 shroud, 2 per clues, and this one requires you to spend 2 clues for investigator. And if you can't, you will get a vehicle enemy. So similar to the other one as well,
but easier to get. But what's funny about the shroud differentiations? It's like, is that big of a deal compared to the number of actions to get the clues in the first place?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I imagine the balance is that like, oh, because it's lower, like more of those actions will result in clues rather than failing to get clues, if that makes sense. So like other investigators might be able to get some off. Right. I think that's kind of the theory behind it.
Right, but it doesn't quite work out that way with the number of actions you have in the round, right? If you're not stopping, because I mean, I guess it goes back to action compression, right? If you don't have your main clover able to pick up that many in one round, what's the difference between this and this?
Right. And I think the design theory is that like, oh, assuming you're only taking basic investigates, you will fail some of the higher shroud ones, and that accounts for the actions that you won't need to take for the lower shroud ones.
Mm-hmm. But if you're doing basic investigates, there's 4 actions here, right? That's not going to cut it.
Well, for 2 players, it's fine.
For 2 player, yeah. For 2 player, then if everyone spends their actions doing it and they all pass equally versus some number of failures. Yeah, exactly.
Correct.
That's just not how most people tend to play.
I think most people tend to assume that 1 action equals 1 clue, when a shroud value could make it so that 1 action equals like 0.75 a clue, if that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
It's nice, I think, in this scenario, clearly for survivors, right? Having the look what I found or any kind of way to just toss out 1 card for 2 clues for your off for your fighter, for example,
Yeah.
it's great. You can just say, okay, well, I will contribute and get a little bit more than my fair share that way.
This one, no, it isn't. All right, this is another dimly lit road. This one is equivalent to this one, actually. No, it's not. It's equivalent to this one.
Yeah.
But for horror.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, where we need to go, Falcon Point approach. If everyone's here, they just advance.
Yay! One
Yay.
shroud, for some reason.
One shroud.
So we actually ended up having to go through all the deck. Remember, though, we start here. We didn't see these other two. And this map will never be the same like this. You only see probably a few locations at a time. Although, there are some weird things you can do to make an enemy stuck at the first location or something.
Correct.
In practice, though, most times you're just like probably 3 to 4 locations out in front of you.
All right. Let's look at the agenda flip because we have 2 agendas. So this one is assuming that the Terror of Devil Reef is dead.
Mm-hmm.
We have 8 Doom Threshold at the backside. The cars sputter out. So you flip over every vehicle so that every vehicle is stopped. I guess you only flip over vehicles that are running, and then you shuffle the encounter discard pile. And if specifically there are 3 or 4 investigators in the game, you discard cards from the top of the encounter deck until a vehicle enemy or a malfunction treachery is discarded, and then the lead investigator draws that. So essentially, you get an additional kind of stalling effect.
Mm-hmm.
Then we go to our second agenda where we are 9 Doom Threshold and the same thing. However, let's assume, or let's say that the Terror of Devil Reef was still alive. And let me just double check. So this is true both if you didn't kill it in Devil Reef and if you didn't get the memory. Is that correct?
That seems correct.
Okay. It's here. So
why? I don't know, but it's here.
Yeah. What this art is something. Is this Eldritch Horror? No, that's the other one.
No, it's this
is like Arkham Horror.
This one's the board game? No, this one's
I'm thinking about the board game, yeah. I'm saying this art is also something.
Yeah, it does look very familiar.
Yeah. Anyway, the Terror of Double Reef is somehow here. I feel like we're a little coastal, or we're a little inland at this point, so it really struggled to get here.
I mean, there's a cliffside road here. There's some water.
I guess you're right. Yeah.
But
anyway, so 363 Monster Elite spawns at the rearmost location. Hunter Massive Retaliate, and has the same text, kind of similar as before, where if it would be defeated, you instead just remove all damage and exhaust it, and it just can't be readied for the next round. So it'll be a persistent threat in theory. It does spawn at the rearmost, so in theory it could like never catch up to you. But there are a lot of cards that might not let that happen. Yeah.
Also, a hunter that is in a location you can't just walk up to, basically, that does 2 and 2 is pretty nasty.
Yep.
Usually when there's a big boss somewhere or mini boss that does that kind of damage, you're like, I'm going to, move into its location, take an evade, and then continue to, deal some damage to it. This is going to hit you for 2 and 2, maybe, probably.
Yeah. All right. And then we have our second agenda, and that's really it.
Yep. It's just another 9 rounds. Now, the 8 plus 9 seems like a lot, but remember that the dimly lit roads put a doom on the agenda, and also
the long ways around.
Sorry, you're right. Long way around. Dimly lit road is one of the actual good ones. And also kind of eats up another round from you because you can't move again. It's almost like putting 2 doom on the agenda, kind of.
Yeah, effectively, yes.
So the 8 plus 9 is not quite accurate. Oh, and you know what else there's in this? Let's just sneak up over here. HDS.
Yeah, there it is.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, what happens when we advance the act?
I believe it's over.
Yay!
Yay! And if we somehow doom out or get defeated, I believe, we're just defeated. And we can actually, if we want, just talk about the resolutions real quick because they're all really fast.
Mm-hmm.
If no resolution was reached, we just note that the investigators reached Falcon Point after sunrise, which is just going to matter for the next scenario. Otherwise, it says before sunrise, and that's all it is.
Cool. It's a pretty simple scenario, and I appreciate that sometimes they do something small like this. It's also a scenario that people look at and say, is it a gimmick scenario?
Right. Yeah, and I think part of why that is that it is a simple scenario, but there is just complexity to the timing of the vehicles and the enemies and the roads. Because there are effectively three timing windows that are important. The first one is the end of the investigation phase, which moves the vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
The second is the hunter enemy phase, which is after the investigation phase, and then the end of the round where things get cleaned up at the back. And if everything goes to plan, those three things happen correctly, then everything's fine. But like this scenario is like I always like to say it's susceptible to messing up if you are like mistimed, like if you forget to move a vehicle or if you don't see a hunter enemy or like you think that it should get to you, but because you move in the investigation phase, it actually you're ahead of it always kind of thing. So there's like those three timing points that are like the complexities of the scenario. But as if you understand what those three things are saying, like the vehicle is always ahead of the enemies unless it's on top of them or something causes them to move again, kind of thing, and like clean up the end kind of stuff.
Let's
Then
show that.
it is ultimately is a simple scenario.
Let's show that on the board just one more time because I think that you're right that we have to sort of pay attention to like if you're here and there's a hunter behind you, right?
Yeah.
You're moving first, and
Yeah.
then the hunter's moving in the enemy phase.
And then these two go away.
And then these two go away. So it's not all that bad. It's just that you have to note that you don't need to move on your own like every other scenario in the game.
Correct.
Especially since we just talked about Devil Reef, where you actually have to drive the boat around. The action on these vehicles is to stop the movement from happening. So, makes things a little bit different. Let's check out the tokens, maybe?
Yeah. So we got skulls -1, -3 instead if there are 6 or fewer locations remaining in the road deck. So it just gets a little worse later goes on.
Mm-hmm.
Cultists -1. For each point you fail by, an investigator in your vehicle places one of their clues on your location. Once again, cultists are continuing with the thing where it's not a bad modifier, but it can be a bad effect, especially if you fail by a lot. It's like a what is that one treachery from Midnight Mass? I always forget.
What, the Hunting Shadow?
The other one.
Oh, False Lead.
False lead. Yeah, this is false lead, right? So yeah, I mean, it can be bad, especially if you're like about to move out of a tough location. But tablets -2 for each point you failed by. Investigator in the vehicle loses 1 resource. Do you hate this one?
Yeah. So you saw what happened to me on.
I did.
Okay.
Yes, you lost like.
Did I play that
actually,
right? I think it was something a timing window question I had about this. Like, this is supposed to be immediately when you draw the token. Is it an effect of the skill test? It wasn't clear.
So actually, I listened to your explanation, and I think there were one thing is I think you said that this would happen in step 6. I think this actually happens in step 7.
7,
right?
I think, is what I meant to say.
Okay, that's fair.
By step 6 step 6 is when you actually calculate how much you would have failed by. So it couldn't happen until after that. Was my
correct?
Point. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the only thing though is that I imagine that this would be treated as a scenario card effect, right? Mm-hmm. Which is like, is this a forced effect, and therefore would take priority over being able to play? Look what I found is the question, right? Mm-hmm.
Well, fair enough. So, that happens in step 6. So if this happens in step 7, doesn't matter.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Yeah, you're right. Look what I found happens in step 6. I forgot that.
Yeah, because it's like Lucky Cigarette Case.
Neat.
Anyway, the thing about this one and the cultist that always got me before is like, okay, it's worded in this weird way of like another deny existence question, right? Like, for each point you fail by, an investigator in your vehicle loses 1 resource.
Oh, right. Is that a choice?
Is that a choice, or is it one person says, I will lose all of the resources?
Right. Yeah, it should honestly be worded as like, choose an investigator in your vehicle to lose 1 resource. That would make it more clear.
Mm-hmm. Or at least, I mean, it's worded in a way that also makes it sound like you can split it, right? So you could have one person lose 2, another person lose 3 if you fail by 5 or something.
Right. I mean, that is what is intended, I believe. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of like the spending clues in the first place too. Yeah,
exactly. It should read like, for each point you fail by, choose an investigator in your vehicle to lose 1 resource.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Anyway, That's these. It's just sometimes you have to write things in a goofy way to fit them on the scenario reference card anyway. The Elder thing, though, isn't like those other two, but it's nasty.
Yes, and usually, right, in I feel like in a regular scenario, this would be like, oh, big modifier maybe does something. In this scenario, big modifier and also it does something because there's going to be a lot of hunter enemies in play, mostly just because they're probably going to be behind you and they haven't touched you yet.
Mm-hmm.
But this thing will cause them to catch up to you.
Yeah, it's necessary, I think, for the scenario to work. It's just a very rough effect because it changes the entire dynamic of what you do during the investigation phase, or if you just finish the investigation phase, what happens then in the subsequent enemy phase.
Yep.
Okay. Seems like we can jump into the treacheries now because those are kind of, there's one that's very much just that token.
Correct. All right. So we got some enemies and some treacheries and then some returning cards as well. Enemies, let's talk about the Pursuing Motor Car 442 Vehicle Humanoid Cultist. Spawns at the rearmost location. It has Hunter. When it attacks you, if you are not in a vehicle, it deals +2 damage to the attack, effectively running you over. And when it attacks an investigator in a vehicle, it attacks each other investigator in that vehicle as well. I actually really like the design of the vehicles in general. I like this one especially so.
I just never am not in the vehicle. Like what's going on where you got out of the vehicle?
If you're, I don't know.
Yeah, but fair enough. Like, what do you think in general of the enemies being vehicles and people? Like, it's hard to do this in this game because everything is just like a single card. But it
Yeah.
reminds me of the Byakhee in Carcosa and Black Star's Rise that is both a monster and a
Yeah.
cultist.
Yeah. No, I mean, I really like these. I really like these cards. I think they're really flavorful.
Hmm. Yeah, I think so too. It sometimes you get something silly where you're like, okay, I'm gonna handcuff a car, but
Yeah, that's true.
you know,
I
it,
when the Cyclopean Hammer came out, I was very excited to hammer time some vehicles down the road.
that's funny. You put a big dent in it, and then it just like goes
Correct.
backwards.
Yeah.
All right, we have two of these, right? We put the other one
Yeah.
somewhere else. Okay.
I believe something like that. I think there should be two.
Hmm.
Where is it? I'm actually not sure. Anyway, there should be two.
Okay.
Here's a hit ban 353 Vehicle Humanoid Cultist. Spawns Rare Modes Hunter Retaliate, but it cannot attack during the same phase it moved via its Hunter keyword, which is nice.
Mm-hmm. So what happened to me was that I drew the tablet, I think, and then it moved, but then it doesn't matter because it didn't move and attack in the same phase anyway. So,
Yep.
eh.
There you go.
5 health enemy though. These are both are pretty like beefy enemies to deal with. So, do you have a preference of how you deal with them when they do, if they do catch up to you?
I just killed him.
You just killed them. Okay.
So I think that I think the interesting thing about the scenario is that a lot of the times I have played this, not only this scenario but this campaign, I always bring a lot of damage, and so these enemies always feel like I don't know, like they never feel like it's too much, if that makes sense, which is kind of weird to say, because it requires a confluence of cards and or bad effects to actually get them engaged with someone in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can kind of almost prep for them in a weird way, in the way that like you wouldn't be able to if they just like came out during the Mythos phase, if that makes sense. It's kind of weird.
That's true. I usually find that they don't come by themselves. There's like usually a pack of them, and I don't have a way of dealing 9 damage at once. It's usually just
Right.
one of them. Like I can deal with the hybrid assassin, no problem. We'll see in a second. Obviously, it catches up much more quickly. But these guys are good candidates for dynamite.
That's true. That's true.
That's my
Yeah,
preference.
and I think specifically for the Pursuing Motor Car, probably focus on this first because in theory it deals more damage at once. And if like for example you get one of these and one of these at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
The hit van most likely move to your location via its hunter keyword, so it won't attack you anyway.
True.
All right, we got the Hybrid Assassin 331 Vehicle Humanoid Hybrid. It has Hunter. It doesn't have the spawn keyword, and so it will just spawn engage with whoever drew it. When it moves via its Hunter keyword, if it's unengaged, you resolve its Hunter keyword again. So it can move twice. It's very fast.
If you evade it, right? If you evade it, leave it behind, and then you move up, it's going to come back to you. That's essentially how that might happen, right?
because if you evade it, it'll go back and one behind, and then next turn it'll move twice to get to you.
Yeah. The one evade is very sneaky. It's like, okay, I'm going to evade it. No, you probably shouldn't.
All right, so here we have some treachery. So we have the bumpy ride. It's a hazard. Revelation. If you are not in a vehicle, you test 5 agility. And if you fail, you take 3 damage. However, if you're in a vehicle, that vehicle's driver tests 3 agility, which might not be you. If the driver fails, each investigator in your vehicle takes 2 damage.
I love this. This is a great effect.
Yes. And we'll see right next to it. We have I Can't See, which is equivalent for willpower and horror. These cards, when I was blind playing through this scenario, I literally I drew I Can't See, and I'm like, what is going on in this scenario? It was so funny to me, and I'll talk about it when we get to the ratings. But these are awesome. Like, they add just so much flavor to the scenario itself. That being said, they can be pretty tough, especially in higher player counts when you're like, well, I'm sorry, my low willpower person, you're the driver, and you're gonna make me cause 2 horror. So, that's that.
So, do you ever pick the driver based on these cards?
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, obviously in our blind playthrough we didn't know they were there, so we couldn't. But yeah, I think in general it's good to pick the driver as someone who has good defensive stats, because of this. So yeah.
You know who's really good at driving cars? It's young Wendy Adams.
Yes, or Safina.
Safina, yeah,
the painter. She's great at driving.
Well, Michael McGlenn should be able to do it, right? Because he's going to be 3-5.
Right, that's true.
I think he's not 5. He's got 3-2. I don't remember what his agility is, but whatever. Kaimani, also quite good.
All right, we got Eyes in the Trees. You test 4 willpower. If you fail, you must either discard an asset you control or discard a card from your hand for each point you failed by. And the bad part about this is that if you fail and you are in a vehicle, everyone else in that vehicle must also resolve as if they had just failed. So just to double check, that means that they can make their own choice whether or not they discard an asset or discard cards, correct?
Yeah, but you still do it based on the points that they failed by, not
correct.
You don't take the test again or something.
Correct. So this one is essentially just Crypt Chill, but it can be worse if you're in a vehicle. So it might like do double Crypt Chill. So it's a little rough, but I feel like this has never really gotten me, but I could see if this really gets someone.
Yeah, I don't think it's too terrible. I mean, you're right. It's Crypt Chill, basically. You just have your driver be able to pass this test, and I think in the scenario, there's just a lot of, I don't want to say there's a lot of time, but there's not a whole lot of, let's put it this way. There's not a whole lot of time to play things in the first place.
Right.
So discarding assets is probably fine.
Yeah, I think also in one perspective, you'd be like, oh, I don't have a lot of time to play things. So this gets rid of like the one thing that I could play, if that makes sense.
Right.
So that could be a problem too.
Or just don't play too many things. You can also choose to discard cards instead. Right?
Yeah.
Because you won't be able to play those, is kind of my point.
Yeah, essentially, yes. I think that's kind of the way to go, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, and then here it is. It's the Elder Thing token.
And for some reason, we're the Red Glove Man. Is that the case? He has red gloves.
It looks like it, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, Revelation. Resolve the Hunter keyword on each enemy in play. If no one moves at this effect, you get a vehicle enemy and spawn it at the rearmost location. So this can actually override the Hybrid Assassin and the Ringed ones having no spawn at the rearmost.
That's true.
Which is interesting. But yeah, this basically just is another Hunter phase.
Right. Has to be a vehicle, though, that gets placed there, not the winged one.
Yep.
Yeah, which also...
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, this reminds me of the fact that the agenda says everything gains Hunter, even though all of these are already Hunter, so we're looking at weakness enemies as well, participating in the car chase. Imagine that they hop in a sidecar or something, right?
Yeah.
That stubborn detective, he'll be continuing being very stubborn.
Correct.
All right. Rest of these we've seen before, but Malfunction, I think, deserves a special discussion because it does, again, the opposite thing as what it did in the last scenario.
Yes. So remember that the fact that the car is running or stopped is not an action ability on the car. It's just either running or stopped. So all malfunction does is it prevents you from turning off the car or turning on the car, which is honestly kind of funny.
It
Like
is.
you're in a running car and you're like, I can't turn it off.
No brakes, no
No,
brakes.
all gas, no brakes. So yeah, this is. I think maybe this is part of the reason why vehicles kind of feel weird in this entire campaign is because there's only two scenarios of vehicles and they do completely opposite things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of weird.
So it doesn't like this one's okay here because there's
Yeah,
only one point in which you are kind of taking a two action tax, right? So when the agenda flips and you are forced to stop the car,
yeah.
then in order to get going again, you have to take this test and then another action to flip it over. But at least more than one person in your team could help out with that. And we make the requisite joke about Daniela here, especially now that we have cars involved, that doing this test is not her forte.
Unfortunate.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
So the flavor text here, I guess, doesn't work for the car as much.
That's true. Yeah, and so yeah, otherwise we have these three cards that come back. These ones are a lot nicer than they were in Pit of Despair, since most likely you'll have less of these tokens in the bag.
That's right.
But ultimately all they do is just more damage, more horror, or discarding more cards.
Yep.
All it is.
It's kind of like these three, right?
Yep. Then we have the winged one in Fog over Innsmouth. Winged one, obviously a little bit hard to do unless you have ranged firearm or spell cards. But I think also it's fairly okay to evade this thing if you need to as well. So yeah,
it's fine. It's just like the other things, the victory points in this scenario. It's tough to figure out how to get them, with everything else going on. But at least this guy has the courtesy of catching up to you, unlike the locations that you have to leave behind.
Fog over Innsmouth, pretty standard. +1 shroud or a horror or both if you fail. I think we talked about this already. And
okay.
then yeah,
we didn't talk about Ancient Evils exactly. So in this scenario, there's a couple of weird timing mechanisms as far as like the getting to the end of the scenario. So you can doom out, you can get to everyone to the end, and then there's the long ways around. So the Ancient Evils cause you to potentially get to that agenda flip faster than you would normally, which may cause the terror to show up. Which, I mean, that guy's a pain, like because you can't actually get rid of him too much.
Yeah.
I don't know. I rarely play with that version just because I do my darndest to kill the terror in the previous scenario.
And also when it dies, it does the whole double evade thing. So you would have to have like a they're catching up twice, I believe, in order for it to do anything.
That's true. That's true. But you do need to get it to your location and then deal the 6 damage. And then, I mean, I think that's easier on higher player counts when someone can deal with that. But otherwise, if you're just spending your whole actions dealing with the enemies or getting the clues, I think it's a giant pain. Anyway, Ancient Evils, though, so there's the long way around I mentioned as well. So I don't think that the scenario, if all of those things are going against you, is particularly easy. So I don't know, like if it's the very last location in the road deck, and you draw 3 or 4 Ancient Evils, because there is a reshuffle at the agenda flip, of course, and in 3 and 4 player you might get through the deck anyway. If you ever go to a long way around, I think you're hosed. I don't think there's enough time for that.
Yeah, I think the issue, right, the what that technically does is it means that, maybe you should take the action to press on the gas.
Correct.
Right? And so I think it's tough because you never really know how far behind you are. I mean, obviously in a blind playthrough, you can't really know. Because like, I don't know, maybe in a blind playthrough, maybe calculated, but you're like, okay, we have 17 Doom total. Ancient Evils represents at least 3 or 4. We have 12 locations to go through. So like, we need to press on the gas like once each time we do the long way rounds, basically, right? So I think ultimately the success of the scenario just comes down to whether or not you can avoid all of the long ways around. Because if you do, I think it's very hard to fail this scenario.
Agreed.
Like
Yep.
you might die first, but you won't do mount. It's really those long ways around that kind of present the trouble.
Yes. Yeah. So if you are forced into some situation where you're guessing, which is why you don't really want to press on the gas unless you
Yeah.
know that the next location is going to be okay. I mean, also think about this, that if you draw an Ancient Evils, well, or just go through the deck quicker because you're drawing an encounter card outside of the normal uh, Mythos phase, you're speeding through to maybe draw these more often than you should. But yeah,
I
like
mean,
if you are
yeah.
going ahead too far and then you don't know which way you're going, you are potentially setting yourself further back than that one action to speed yourself up was going to give you.
Right. And that's why it's really important to know where you're going.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people when gosh, what was the card called? The spyglass, right?
The pocket telescope. Oh yeah.
Pocket telescope. When that was previewed, people were like, "This scenario is over. You don't need to even spend clues anymore," which is technically true.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, I think without that card, it's where the real like uh, tension of the scenario comes into play. Of like, oh yeah, we really need to see where we're going, so we don't go the long way around.
That's right. And if you haven't, yeah, your first play on it, and you're like, I don't know, let's just guess or something, and then you see what the effect is of the long way around. That's pretty rough.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I do think that the timing on this one is pretty good. I mean, there's just some randomness of Ancient Evils if you get more than 3 or 4. I've never played this in 4. No, I have played it in 4 player. But I would say that if you can can manage the mini game of getting all the clues on those particular locations. How many are there now with road 2 or 3? It's just a couple, right? One,
Yeah, I think it's 4.
2. It might just be 3.
There's 2 copies of those, right? And there's 2 forks in the road.
Okay, so there's 4. So those are all, once you've hit all of these, and you'll know because the long ways around will be gone. That deck has exactly that number. Unless, of course, it's one of the ones behind and you won't ever know
Yeah.
until you get to the end. Uh, then you'll know it's pretty easy to just go through
Yeah.
a little more quickly. Yeah. Okay. Well, what else do you want to talk about? Just move on to our ratings?
I'll just quickly mention the thing you mentioned earlier about breaking the scenario.
Sure. Luke?
Yeah, so Luke does it. Obviously, I think this one is not obvious, but I should say one of the few times where Luke can genuinely break the scenario. So I'm going to bring up Luke Robinson and a special card called Barricade.
Yes.
So if it should work on level 0, if I recall, right?
Yeah. If you play it behind you, right? And he
Correct.
can only he can only take level 0, right? So
yeah, that's true. So yeah, Luke Robinson, his effect is that you can play an event each turn as if you were at a connecting location. So what would happen is you would have like an enemy here. Let's say you're here, and investigation phase, you attach this as if you were here.
Mm-hmm.
And because you're not actually here by the time that you leave the location, the force effect to discard the barricade will never happen. This guy will attempt to move, and it can't. And then when we go to the removal locations, we would get this one. But then this one will stay here forever, essentially. And now the road goes ever long and long. And these guys will be stuck at the very back.
I mean, it's kind of thematic. You put down like a roadblock or something, right?
I guess so.
But it's pretty silly. Yeah. I guess you could get still the ones that, discard cards until you get a vehicle and spawn it with you, right? But yeah, you'll get the long road though.
Yeah.
And then Luke can just like hop back and forth. He might have to spend some actions, but
Yeah.
One other thing, I mentioned handcuffs earlier. What happens if we were to put the barricade here? Maybe not here, but what if it were here? And we have one of these there.
Oh, right. I mean, I think this guy goes here, right?
Yeah.
Like, actually, I guess that's a question, right? Because are both paths considered to still be connecting paths, right?
If you're here, probably no. If you're here, then yes, because we know that this one is connected to this one, which is connected to the next one.
Right. But I mean to say that,
But if
like,
you're here,
let's say that you're here, right?
yeah,
Or actually, this probably, hold on. This probably is more just better to see. Like
okay,
this,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Or like this. So the enemy doesn't choose the path, right? Because you choose the path.
Mm,
And so both of these are equidistant. And this technically doesn't say that this one is no longer connected, right?
yes,
So,
okay.
like, could you just choose this path and be like, that's the path I take? Bonk. That's the question, right? Or do you have to choose? Do you have to choose this path because this card specifically says that they can't move this way? I don't. I don't actually know.
Yeah, there's some ruling out there I think that makes it go around. Just can't enter in this one, unfortunately. I'm not sure how much I buy that ruling, but obviously this makes the scenario kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So you might as well. But I was going to point out here that this says after a vehicle enters long way around. This is not a vehicle. It's a
Oh, vehicle
enemy.
enemy.
Enemy, yeah, but it's not going to cause the
Correct.
a doom to be placed, and that vehicle he's not stuck here either.
Yeah. Well, I forgot. I can't believe that you were going to mention something, and I'm like, I'm going to mention something else. Yeah.
Well, anyway, anything else? Any other silly things to?
No, I mean that's basically it. This
Yep.
silliness abound.
All right, we can do some ratings then. Hang on one sec.
Yep.
Okay, we are back for some discussion. Replayability is interesting here. It's more or less the same idea every time, but the locations are all randomized.
And I think similar to like Vanishing of Eleanor Harper.
Mm-hmm.
The locations are randomized, and therefore the sequence of events you're going to take through the scenario is different every time. Whether or not that's like, oh, we need to get 2 clues this round, or 4 clues, or 6 clues this round. That being said, the goal is the same. You're just trying to get to the end. So there's, I think, a little bit to enjoy on a second, third playthrough because of the fact that knowing how the scenario works, you can kind of master it, if this makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
This was one of the few where the variance doesn't mean that you can't master it. I think that this one is like, if you know what you're doing, you can actually get through it really easily. Kind of scenario. So I think there's a little bit there, but ultimately not too much. I think I'm going to give it a 3.
I'm going to go with a 3.5. I do like that sometimes you have an easy first couple rounds where you're like, well, I mean, you can't set up in this one very much, but you might not need to immediately spend all the clues that are on your location in the very first round. Otherwise, you have to take a tough test and go off the road, which is exactly what we revealed on the first location in our little review here. Sometimes it's a little bit more chill, but even so, for those, like if you can get the test down to like a 1, you should be able to pass it, right? All right, so I'm gonna give it a 3.5. I think that seems okay. Shall we move on to fairness?
Yes.
So, does a challenge create interesting and meaningful decisions for the players? I think so. I think there's this nice tension between do I get all the clues? Can I tank some damage? Can I afford to go ahead a little bit? Do I want to get the victory points? There's a lot here, and I think those choices help mitigate the random elements that I just said about how maybe you get a bad location first. Well, they give you an out, right? You don't have to take a 5 willpower test or else you die. Like you can do something about this, and they give you warning.
I think there's a little bit though. So not originally, but I've seen like some people like when they read the rules about the spending the clues.
Mm-hmm.
They saw it as being like you can spend up to that much, and then for each clue you don't spend, you have to do the thing. And honestly, in like the back of my head, I wish they did it that way.
Where you could
Because
choose to hold on to clues.
exactly. Because it presents this thing where you're like, oh, maybe this is a time where we can save clues because we can afford to take damage or horror or have an enemy spawn, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's maybe with the current existing things that check it, it might not work out too well because like there's never a reason to not have a vehicle spawn, for example, vehicle enemy spawn because you might as well just kill it. But I think that there's a way that they could do it that would make it interesting, like maybe having less clues overall on the locations as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that without that, it does feel like the players are like, all right, can we get all the clues this round? Yes, no, maybe so. And that's kind of what they are given. And I think that ultimately that's what a lot of people I feel like that's why a lot of people don't like this scenario, is because it mostly feels like get all the clues this round, do that for like 14 more times. Right?
Yeah. That's definitely true.
Yeah. And so I feel like if there was more of that agency on what to do with those clues, it definitely would feel more fair. That being said, I do think that it does, to our second point on this slide, it does apply appropriate pressure. I always feel like it goes right to the end or to the edge of this scenario to reach the end. I like the fact that there is some variance on when the end of the scenario is, although of course it's always sad when you lose victory because of it.
Yeah, that's true. Because it could be on one of the last ones that you never see because you can't get past that road. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think it's like I like it how unfair it is kind of, but I can see why people don't like it because of that. So I think with that in mind, I'm gonna also just I don't know, I'm gonna go a little lower actually. I think I'm gonna give it like a 2.5.
Okay. Let me ask you about the pressure question just more formally on the first round. So, do you mind that the first round is like, here you go, that you don't get to, dig for your investigation assets? This could be tougher on some groups other than others. Maybe we'll talk about more in the next slide, but is that appropriate pressure to get going right away? It's thematically appropriate for sure.
Yeah, it's a good thought. Honestly, I would not be upset if there was like an initial location that didn't have effect or didn't have clues on it. I'd be like, this is where you start, and then the car moves after the first round.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that's coupled, maybe that alone could solve the problem of it feels like I'm always never like ahead, which again, that is the intended experience of the scenario.
Mm-hmm.
But
that is the game.
Yeah, it does. Like I think I would prefer that, if possible. I think it would be more interesting.
All right, 2.5 for you.
Yeah,
I'm gonna go just diverge quite a bit. I suppose I kind of whole point ahead. I think 3.5
all right.
feels right for me. I am higher on this right now, partly because I played it solo and it went fine. It didn't feel like it was impossible to deal with, but maybe it's just better in a lower player count, or I just had a good run. I don't know.
I think
It felt like I could do it. It didn't feel like this was like a big ask.
I think in solo, this actually is one of the few times where a scenario is easier than two player.
Mm-hmm.
Because in solo, because of the ways, like if the goal of each round is to get all the clues out of the location, in solo, that can be one action, right? And that's huge, the ability to do that. In two player, if you have two per clues, it is very unlikely you can do that in one action. You have to take at least two, maybe at least three to be able to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that ultimately takes up the entire turn of someone and potentially more actions from someone else, even with clue compression, if that makes sense. So like there's some weird balancing there going on, I think.
What's interesting to me about the scenario too is you compare it to how many clues you need to get in like other scenarios, which are just, balanced differently, of course. But okay, let's just go on to the next slide. We'll continue talking about this.
Yeah.
Because I think this is essentially the question about what does your team comp look like in a scenario like, I don't know, the beginning of Carcosa, Curtain Call, which requires you get, what is it, 3 per clues on the very first act?
That sounds right.
So That's 3 clues or 6 in 2 player, if we're going with our comparison from a second ago. And after that, what do you really need to do as far as
Yeah.
clues? You need to do a an investigate, I suppose. You don't have to even on the man piled mask twice, and potentially pick up a couple clues on a location that you uh, didn't need to visit. Other than that, like maybe at most you're getting 10 clues.
Right.
That's
I
it.
I I would mention, obviously, this is the fifth scenario out of
Yeah,
eight, so it's
yeah.
not like the first scenario. But I think that there is, yeah, like this one, in order to do, like, I think what a lot of people see in this one is that there is no room to, like, for example, in Curtain Call, you can be like, I don't need to get the clues off of the backstage because it's one clue, there's no victory, right?
Hmm.
A lot of people, I feel like, focus on the clues that are for victory, which makes sense because those are in theory more valuable, and therefore they can use those clues to be able to advance the act instead of getting clues from somewhere else. In this scenario, every single clue is important because it can cause you to die, essentially.
Hmm.
um, but the scenario expects you to not get them all, is the thing.
Right.
Right, the scenario expects you to be like, don't even try to go for these clues because you're just going to die, right? Or get as many as you can, and if you can't, well, you die. And the trick with the victory thing is that you need all of them in order to be able to get the victory. So sometimes it feels like it's not even worth to try because you can't get them all, if that makes sense.
Right. Why do you need one? But some of them are on the locations where you use the clues to look ahead, so you kind of want to focus on those. I find it interesting in decks that have, I don't want to say like a limited number of clues in the deck, but anything that's not a I'm gonna basic investigate um, needs to count out how many clues they think they can pick up. If you're
Yeah.
focusing on your rite of seekings, your clairvoyances, etc., you need to make sure you use them on the victory point locations or the ones that will really cause you to die. Partly because of what you said a minute ago about the forced spending of some of the locations.
Yeah. And I think that essentially what that leads to is, at least in the balance, which we're talking about now, I guess,
Hmm. Hmm.
um, it leads to this interesting scenario where if you have a clover who can reliably get a bunch of clues each round, aka basic investigating, or just regular like investigating without spending charges, for example,
Right.
um, then their entire job is to get clues all the time, which normally that is their job, but I think in this one more so. And everyone else's job is to get clues if they can. Because the weird thing about the scenario is that it sometimes does also feel like the fighters aren't doing anything because the all of the enemies are behind them.
Yeah,
Um,
that's right.
and you literally have to draw cards from the encounter deck in order for them to catch up at all. Or if you're like, oh, we're doing very well, let's just push on the gas, and now they have to draw 2 encounter cards from the encounter deck. / someone needs to draw an Elder Thing and fail to be able for them to catch up at all.
I mean, it happens. When I played this 4 player, the only time I played it, I was playing the fighter. I felt very busy because somehow those enemies kept catching up, but I had a couple of survival knives out, and once they got to me in the enemy phase, they were done for. It was kind of fun.
You slash their tires.
Exactly. I sent out a dog and threw some knives at their tires. Yeah.
Nice.
But you're
Um,
right. I think the issue here is twofold. So one is like, do you have investigation spells or assets that are your way of getting clues? If you don't find them, you're also in a bit of a pickle. Like mystics tend to need to find all their good stuff for them to play the game. And what do you do until then?
and that's also a reason why it might have been nice to have like an opening location
Hmm.
that didn't do anything, just to for people to set up, kind of like in one of those mini agendas in the Unspeakable Loath, for
Yeah.
example, that
Or
just has
or in
two
like
games.
Hemlock Vale seems to do that fairly often too. Like the minecart chases sort
Yeah,
of does that. I will say on the other end, you have to remember that you don't spend any actions in this one to move other than the pedal to the metal. So you sort of have additional actions to try the investigate again or find your stuff. Um, a lot of Seekers are relying on Pathfinder too, so to kind of give them the effect that the car has here.
That's true.
Amanda,
Okay.
man, she's really good in this one, right?
Oh gosh, yeah.
Uh,
All right.
yep.
2.5.
Okay.
I'm like a little low on this one.
Hmm.
But not because I don't like it, which is weird. So, I mean, we're gonna get to experience, but
Yeah.
go ahead.
Um. Yeah, this one's tough because I really agree with what you said, and I can imagine a lot of teams that otherwise do well get thrown for a loop here. Monterey Jack doesn't really get an ability, uh, I mean, unless he's the one who drives the
Oh,
car.
right. Is that at the end of his turn?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So he could get it, but on the other hand, his weakness doesn't do anything either because he always gets to move from scenario card effects.
Oh yeah.
Still, hmm, I'll just go with three.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So it may seem like I don't like this scenario, judging by the fact that I've rated things 3, 2.5, 2.5.
Hmm.
I'm giving this a 5.
Yeah.
This is my favorite scenario in this campaign. Mostly just because I think it is one of the few times where I genuinely felt the experience that the scenario is presenting to me. All the stuff that we've been talking about, how there's like too much pressure at the very start. The balance is off. It always feels like you're on the back foot. It always feels like you're just like struggling to get clues and stuff. Legitimately put me in the mind space of being like, we're in a freaking car chase. Yes, that is how it's supposed to feel. I love the car chase. The fact that yes, the enemies don't have something to do is like it's so thematic to me that like we're watching them in the rear view mirror and they're like slowly catching up to us, and literally the card is like they're catching up to us. I can't see.
Hmm.
There's a freaking the ride is bumpy. We're about to fall off a cliff. There's so many awesome things about the scenario thematic wise that I can't not put this at a 5. It's one of the most fun I've had playing scenario, even if we lost. And I think that's what's really cool about the scenario is that like I always feel like, if we lose because we were too late or if we fell off a cliff, it's always like a great story about how we lose this scenario. And I just can't fault it for that. I think you know, they specifically made an imbalanced scenario so that it would feel like a car chase, and I love it.
I'm right with you. I think you said it very, very well. I feel like this is the scenario when I'm playing it. It is what they advertised, and I don't mind, as I said earlier, them having a little bit of a gimmick scenario, but I'm a little higher on the balance and fairness, I think, than you, partly because it still feels doable. I don't feel like um they just are laughing at you falling off the cliff. When you compare it to something like Essex, right? You, as you did at the beginning, where a lot of things making you have a lot of pressure on you felt like it was out of your control, like there's doom accumulating on an enemy and you just can't get there. So I like the version of this where you don't have to worry about moving in a particular order. Everyone's just sort of there and can work on their thing, but there's a lot of pressure from you moving and from the behind that makes it very engaging.
Yep.
Cool. Uh, so you mentioned like an agenda zero or act zero or something to maybe give you a bit of time to set up. What else would you suggest to enhance the not the experience, enhance the rest of the scenario to make it match being more balanced or fair?
I think there could be something done about how the roads, like the long way round, work.
Hmm.
They could be less punishing. So like instead of having you not be able to leave, just put a doom on and that's fine. Just keep going. Which like makes sense to me because the enemies are also following the long way around. I don't understand why they get to catch up to you. Um,
Exactly.
and like if there was, I think if there's either more of a reason or like less of a risk to push to uh push the gas, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
I think that could be more interesting. I actually never really thought about this. Like instead of drawing an encounter card, you like, I don't know. I mean, I kind of like it how it is right now. Like it is risky, and that's like how it should be.
Hmm.
But like, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know
Yeah,
either. I think it would be interesting to think about. The only thing I would suggest for the scenario, for I mean, if you were watching this far, man, you've already played it at least a few times. But I wish that in the campaign guide or somewhere they had it much more clear what the long way arounds, like the position on the map, should look like. Because I don't think we did it right the first time, and it was a little confusing as to like columns and rows, and you know that I think could be handled better.
yeah,
Just
that's fair.
a visual, because it's the scenario itself. You mentioned all these timing points is so unorthodox that you need a little bit more hand holding to make sure we all get it. I'm trying to think of other scenarios that have that problem where you're like, well, did I do this right?
Right.
Because it's so odd. I can't think of one on top of my head. This might be the one. Uh, I don't know. I'll come up with something eventually. But yeah, I just felt like this is a good scenario that sometimes gets let down because your first play, you're a bit confused.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of it. It's like the again when I talked about earlier the confusion on the investigation phase, enemy phase, end of round, like doing that every time, and like the forced effect on the agenda is so long you can kind of like glaze over like, okay, stop whenever each thing, but it's one location behind Ramos. I don't know. Um,
Yep.
so yeah,
All right. Well, that is it for this scenario. Thank you all for watching. It's going to be a good time where we talk about the light in the fog, which is my favorite scenario of this campaign. So that'll be next week. See you then.
goodbye.